let's talk about books. These are the books I read in March and April. Here we go. The first one is The Kiss Countdown by Etta Easton. This is a romance that Low recommended, and it was a fun time. It was not super annoying. It wasn't my favorite romance I've ever read. Just a solid book. It was entertaining. It was what I want from a sweet little treat. And the tropes are fake dating into forced proximity, which is pretty fun. The male main character is an astronaut, and the female main character is a event planner. It's set in Houston, which is fun because there's a lot of people who live in Houston and not a lot of books set there. The next book I read is Bone Black by Bell Hooks. I heard about this on Substack. It was my first Bell Hooks, so I have not read All About Love or anything else by this author. It was remarkable. It was fantastic. I think it's a perfect book, truly. When I finished it, I was like, I probably could read this once a year. And that would be not just worthwhile, but something I would prioritize doing. Like, there's a lot of maybe incredible books worth rereading, but this one I hope to reread. In the introduction to this, she uses the phrase writing imaginistically, which I love. And then later in the introduction, she says, these are the things that I remember over and over that are the beginning point of what I end up using in all of the other work I have ever created. Like, this is the beginning of me. It's set in the rural South, and I lived in the South, so I love that. I think it is beautiful and full of love and really profound. I think the power of selection and the almost garden that she built with the scenes that she chose is just incredible. There's so much wisdom and so much just read it. Just read it. You're welcome. You're welcome. The next book I read is Under the Skin by Linda Villarosa, The Hidden Toll of Racism on American Lives and on the Health of Our Nation. I heard about this book from Roxane Gay. It was in her 2023 write-up of the best books she read, along with The Whiteness of Wealth by Dorothy A. Brown. Like the subtitle says, this is a book about healthcare and racism. It is incredibly upsetting and heavy. A lot of the things in it I had heard before. A lot of the things in it I had not heard before. It doesn't matter. Like, it's horrifying either way. So I thought that one of its strengths, Linda Villarosa has been a journalist for a really long time, and she was able to pull together so much research in a way that was so incredibly readable. One of the main reasons that I read is because I want to do my homework. Like, I want to know what's going on, and I want to find out how the world works for other people and understand that and care about that. I think reading is a way to care and also a way to activate care, or activate the type of care that turns into action besides just reading. And so this, along with this book, are both things that I felt responsible to read, but I think that's not a problem. Like, it's fine that you should learn about things that maybe don't affect me directly, right? Like, I do not move through the healthcare system in America as a person of color. I want to read this book to learn about that. This is a really worthwhile book. I think anyone who works in healthcare absolutely needs to read it, like required on the syllabus in nursing school and medical school. And I think that every person, especially if you are not a person of color in America, should read this book. I also appreciated how well she told stories from the present, how many different situations she explored, like in person. She goes to a lot of things and interviews a lot of people. There's just a lot of important stuff in here. The next book is The Love Lyric by Christina Forrest. I think this is a goofy title and a goofy cover, truly. I read the second, this is the third in a series about the Green Sisters. And I read the second one for Ab, which is called The Partner Plot, and I thought it was super fun. The first one is called The Neighbor Favor. I haven't read it, and it gets really like average reviews. And then I was at Call and Response on the South Side, and they had like 8 copies of these the week it came out, and I just bought it right there because I wanted to. It was super fun. It's a single mom female main character whose husband died, and the male main character is a R&B star. And it was honestly just a fun read. It didn't really stick with me, but she works in PR. So when he is a spokesperson for their skincare company, she ends up going on like the week-long trip with him, I think. And anyway, it was a fun time. It's not going to change your life. That's all you need to know. Oh, okay. This book is called The Black Utopians. It's by Aaron Robertson. And I saw this actually, I think, for the first time when it was put on the New York Times Best 100 Books of 2024 list. The book did not work for me. Let me tell you what it's about, and then I'll tell you why it didn't work. The subtitle is Searching for Paradise in the Promised Land in America. And it says that it's going to be a book about Black communities creating Black utopias. So spaces where they build a complete community, and it promised to kind of trace that through American history. It casts this really wide vision, and I think not just the write-ups and stuff, but also the book thought it was doing something. Like nonfiction, like structure is so important, and I really felt like what this book told me it was doing while I was reading it was very different from what I learned by the time I got to the end. If I were to describe this book, I would say it was a biography of Albert Clegg, I think is how you say the last name, who lived in Detroit and started a Black Christian nationalist movement and did a lot of really incredible community work and had a housing, like a building where people lived. And Aaron Robertson interviews some of the people who grew up in that space. It was not a sweeping look at the history of Black utopian communities in the United States. I just don't think that it did that at all. And I was really frustrated even while I was reading it. So it's talking a little bit about Albert, it's talking a little bit about Glanton Dowdle, like at this point in the book. And then I accidentally happened to go like this later, and I saw the name Albert and Glanton, and I realized in that moment we weren't going anywhere. This entire book was going to be about Albert and Glanton. And it also was not interesting if it was a book about Albert and Glanton. And I was really bummed. And so I would not recommend this book. I would be curious who loved it. It's partially set in Detroit, so maybe if you really wanted to read about Albert Clegg and you, yeah, I don't really know. The next book I read is The Barn by Wright Thompson. This is a nonfiction book about this, which is a photo of the barn where Emmett Till was murdered in 1955. It was not known as the site of the murder for a really long time. Wright Thompson lives in the Mississippi Delta. He grew up 23 miles northwest of where the barn is located. This is a book told with so much. He's writing about his home, and he didn't know about the barn until 4 years ago. He moved back to Clarksdale, Mississippi during the pandemic. I was so blown away by this book. I picked it up for Black History Month. Wright Thompson is a white man, which I did not know. He does in this book what I feel like Clint Smith was asking for in this book. So, How the Word is Passed is about how different places in America remember or misremember our past, specifically the history of slavery, and he goes to a bunch of different places in America. It's obviously in the Hall of Fame. It's fantastic. The Barn is like How the Word Is Passed meets Boomtown, which is a book by Sam Anderson about Oklahoma City. Okay, I want to read you some of the book, but that does not usually translate super well. It's not really interesting. The barn where Till was murdered, Patrick, the community organizer, said was just some guy's barn full of decorative Christmas angels and duck hunting gear, sitting there in Sunflower County without a marker or any sort of memorial, hiding in plain sight, haunting the land. The current owner was a dentist. He grew up around the barn. When he bought it, he didn't know its history. And he goes from there. I mean, that's the beginning of the book. So he tells the story of the people. I don't even want to say, like, he doesn't even get to the murder until later in the book, because he wants you to know this is Emmett Till. This is why he was in Mississippi that summer. This is who he was living with, his cousin, his uncle. These are the friends that he made. This is what it looks like to live in the world of cotton. This is what they were doing during that week. This is it is just what happens when you pour, this is my review, all of your curiosity and time and love into excavating the history of your state and its land. This excellence, magic, heart, humility, and creativity channeled down dark roads in every direction. Mississippi is absolutely singular and is a cipher for the entire history of the United States. Thompson wrote what is to me a perfect book. I'm truly astounded at the perfection of the structure, the expansive research, the love and reverence he gives the family and the activists, the sentences every so often that hit like a shooting star. Never before has a section of my index, which is like themes that I'm interested in generally, I would write the name of the theme in the back and the page numbers of things that relate to it. So Bronzeville is one of them, which is a neighborhood in Chicago. Systems of Violence is another index topic. You know how indexes work. Never before has a section of my index just been called WTF. And that one is real long. And this is a book about the lynching of Emmett Till. Sure, it's also a book about what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. There's also so many name drops in this book. Like, this so and so family was farmers and they had some family move up north. And so the Franklins followed that family and moved up north. And then Aretha grew up to become Aretha Franklin. Like, that happens so many times. Like, everything is connected to Mississippi. I believe that now that I have read this book. And I also just to tell a story of horror so well with so much love. It's like that quote that's like, wars are fought twice, once on the battlefield and a second time in memory. And I love that this man dedicated so much of his research and creative energy to this story and then made it into something. Because obviously, anytime you create something, anytime you write, it's a creative act. I think to create something worthy out of something horrifying is just a really beautiful thing to do. This book is fantastic. I need to stop talking about it. I'm also kind of tearing up. The next book I read was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I was recommended this by the Book Fair podcast girlies. It is set in Shakespeare's time, so 1500s England, Stratford upon Avon, and London. It is a story of Shakespeare's son, Hamnet, who died. And then 4 years later, he writes the play Hamlet. And at the time, those two names were interchangeable. This is almost, it's equally about Shakespeare, the children, the family, and Shakespeare's wife. Maggie O'Farrell just adds a lot of magic to the story. It is really heartbreaking. So it bounces back and forth between the present day when Hamnet is ill with the Black Plague, which is how he died, and then the past, which is all of the things that led William, and I think he names the wife Agnes. Yeah, she names the wife Agnes, to meet and then fall in love and then have kids and where they're living and all of these things. It it was heartbreaking. It was really, really human. It didn't, um, like, this isn't my book. It's great historical fiction. It's really, really well written. And I'm glad I read it. This is The Favorites. It's by Lane Fargo. Megan got it for me, told me to read it. She has been selling it like crazy at the shop. Lane Fargo is a local author to Chicago. It is ice dancing themed. It's set with ice dancing. So this is Katrina and this is probably Heath. And Holly Gramazio blurbed it on the back and said, a glittery, compulsive whirl of a book. And that's exactly what it is. Glittery and compulsive, like completely. Filled with spite and love and sequence and ambition. I just completely agree with that read. I was pretty anxious at the beginning of this. I didn't know where it was going. And then I kind of settled in once I figured out the timeline. It follows the main ice dancer. It follows this Katarina? Katrina? She goes by Kat. And what she goes through essentially to try to become the best ice dancer out there. It's kind of Grey's Anatomy and how it has these like competitive female characters where they're just super bloodthirsty and that's just part of who they are. It was really fun. So half of it is told from Kat's perspective looking back, and then there's little moments in between that are told documentary style. So someone's shooting a documentary with all the other characters um looking back on their life. So it's, I mean, little colons and someone's editing everything together, and that works really well. I think it would be hard to pace that compellingly, and she absolutely did, because you're kind of creating cliffhangers in between these different types of telling the story. She pulls a lot from, the main thing that I heard in this was the story of Tanya Harding. I think she also has a couple of other ice skating muses, if you will. It's kind of in the lane of Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is, I think, a huge inspiration for Lane. This was quick. It was fun to read and really twisty. Lots of drama, lots of just like interpersonal, who's with who right now kind of things. And it's really different than a lot of books out there, I think. It was fun. The next book I read is The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. This is the third book in the Kiss Quotient series, which is my favorite romance series out there. It follows Quan, who's like the cousin of Michael, who's the guy in the first one, and Anna, who you see here on the cover. I love these books, like with no questions or thought. So I'm not even going to analyze it. I just really love it. I loved Kiss Quotient. I loved The Bride Test. And I think it's just the characters in the book. I just love the characters and I love reading about them, and I think they're all darling. And that's all I'm going to say about this book. It's set in San Francisco, and I went to San Francisco last month, and I went to the Palace of Fine Arts because Quan takes Anna there in this book, which is so funny. But it was a fun thing to do. This is Who Will Run the Frog Hospital by Lori Moore. Teddy recommended this to me, and Sarah Marshall recommended it to her. This is set in upstate New York or somewhere like that in the, I don't know, 70s ish. And it is one of those stories that's sort of a girlhood friendship story, if that's a genre. So, like My Brilliant Friend, or I feel like there's one I'm not thinking of, but it follows these two girls and it's really short, like you can tell. It's really, really well written in terms of the specific detail. Like everywhere that she puts me, they work at this theme park together, which is so funny. And they, go to different like bars or late night places. Like everywhere she writes you, you feel like you're absolutely there. And it wasn't like It didn't hit for me. And I can look at this and say, this book works. It's a great book. It would absolutely hit for certain people. And I remember I got this at Rizzoli in New York because Teddy had told me about it for a long time. And I usually buy a book at other bookstores if it's a staff rec, like if one of the staff members recommends it, because it's really fun when you are a staffer when people buy the books you rec. So I had meaning to buy it for a long time. Finally got it at Rizzoli, and she said in her little rec, I don't remember who did it, she said, "This just feeds my theory that the friends you make in middle school are some of the most impactful relationships on your entire life, basically. Even though like you fall out of touch with them, it's just such a formative time." After that, I read The Eyes and the Impossible by Dave Eggers, another Teddy Rec. This is a kids or middle grade book. It is set on a park, and you follow this dog named Johannes, who is the eyes of the park. So he reports back to the bison because it's kind of a ginormous park. And it was weirdly colorless for something that feels like it would be so compellingly colorful. You've got talking animals and they're all friends, and that part was fun. The friends were my favorite part of the book. It was really solemn for a kid's book. Strangely, there was one scene that was really funny with the dog and these sheep, but it was an adequate book. This reminded me of Wildwood. It was better than Wildwood. It also reminded me of Wild Robot, and it was not as good as Wild Robot to me. It just didn't work. I don't know if it took itself too seriously or what, but read this. The next book I read was We Used to Live Here by Marcus. I don't even have his last name written down here. It wasn't for me. It was the book club pick at the store. It's kind of horror. It's kind of, I don't know. I started reading it and then I started skimming it and then I skimmed the end and then I thought, that's not for me. So now you know, if you are into that, that's all you get from it. You can skip that, but the cover's really cool and I think it's going to be a movie. Then I read, which also is in the book of little summaries, Great Expectations. I should say I finished Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So I had started this ages ago and just left my bookmark in for years. And so at the beginning of this year, I said I wanted to finish this and one other classic that I've kind of gotten stopped part of the way through. So I did. And I think you definitely like kind of lose something when you read a book, half of it 4 years ago and half of it now. But I loved A Tale of Two Cities in high school. I think I'm gonna chill out on the Charles Dickens for now. Real long, and you I don't need to read, that many. I do have a bunch of them. After I read A Tale of Two Cities, I decided he was my favorite author. Which, if you can do that with one book for a 16-year-old girl, then that's great. And so there was a little used bookstore near us in Tulsa, and mom had bought me like there's a bunch of these, and they all match, which I'm super grateful for, and they're gorgeous. It follows the story of Pip, a young boy who gets um he grows up, it's kind of a rough deal, and then he comes into money and he thinks he knows where it comes from. Turns out of course he doesn't. And it's a time. The Rin by Anne Enright won the Booker. It was recommended by Book Fair Pod. This is set in the United Kingdom area, and supposedly it follows three women of the same family in different generations, which again, I had just read Banyan Moon. Banyan Moon follows a grandmother, the mother, the daughter. Then I took a break because I thought, don't read too many of those too closely together, which fine. Then I read this, and this is my review. Yeah, I wrote the word yeah. So, dot, dot, dot. This book was no more substantive than Gauzy Tool. I just finished it, and I don't know what happened or why it exists. Jerk father, abusive boyfriend, Carmel, and Nell, that's the mom and the daughter, poems and birds. whatever. It reminded me of the Rachel incident. I didn't like this at all, and it did not work for me. Enjoy. Oh. Then, wow, I was on a book fair pod kick. I really like the book fair podcast, book and then FARE, but two books in a row did not jive with. This is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It was huge in 2005. I remember seeing it everywhere. I thought it sounded scandalous. It was a mess. I have been trying to find a thriller, a mystery that I think works and is interesting, and I thought this was going to be it, and it was not. It tries to do financial crime and violence against women and this family drama and like solving this mystery, and then 300, yeah, oh my gosh, this book is so long, like 300 pages in, and this is a slight spoiler, but you don't want to read this anyway. The guy who's helping the patriarch solve this mystery that the patriarch of this huge family has spent all his massive resources trying to solve for the last 30 something years. This journalist who comes in has the brilliant idea to go look at all the photos instead of some of the photos. Like, that is the plot thing that's like, oh my gosh, this turned it all around. What? Like, that is so, that doesn't, I just was so disappointed in that. And then the main woman who helps is a hacker, which I guess was probably cooler and more interesting in 2005. This book also uses the word anorexic like it's an adjective that means skinny, which is not a thing. Maybe we blame that on the translator. It also tried to, so the Swedish, it was originally written in Swedish. The Swedish title is called Men Who Hate Women, and there's a lot of violence against women in this book, but I'm not really convinced that it did anything with that or said anything interesting besides this is everywhere and it's wrong, which might be what this guy was going for. I don't really think that's enough. I also found one of the scenes to be way too graphic. And that's another thing where I kind of, I mean, think like, okay, well, you wrote this however many years ago. I think a lot of times with any books that deal with violence against women, particularly sexual violence, I look at whether it was pre or post Me Too. So Beartown was one for me. This is Beartown, and it essentially covers how a small town reacts in response to the rape of a young girl by a young boy who he's the hockey star of their town. And this book was also pre Me Too. And I'm inclined to give books that came out before there was this huge cultural discussion around how the world is violent towards half of itself. I'm inclined to give them a little bit more breathing room or like slack, I guess, cut them a little more slack in terms of like how they did what they did and whether it worked or not, because you could essentially say that like you were doing something that was rare and you were maybe having to do some more like convincing, more laying the groundwork than you are if you write something about violence now or anytime in the last 10 years. I'm trying to think of a post 2016 book that stands on the shoulders of Me Too in a way that's interesting. Maybe I'll think about that. I mean, there's a lot of books, especially in this section, that helps create, right, a cultural discussion around sexual violence. This is one of the best ever. This is one of the best ever. I hold these books so close to me, and I like these. That's not a super interesting thing to say, but that's where we're gonna wrap it up because I can't. I want to keep thinking about that. I then read They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. Low sells this at the shop a lot. I don't read a lot of YA. I really prefer middle grade also. I think maybe that sort of simplicity is why it focuses a lot less on hormone induced breakdowns. I sound like such a judgy adult, but I was judgy when I was a teenager too. So I get to hang on to this judginess. All that to say, if I'm going to read and really enjoy a YA book, it has to carve a very specific path. They Both Die at the End reminded me a lot of Elsewhere. Elsewhere is written by Gabrielle Zevin, who wrote this book, which we know I love. This is an adult book. This is YA. And you should read both of them. These both deal with death, both in a really interesting way. So it is just this setup to do something really bittersweet and beautiful. And it absolutely worked for me. So it's a interesting premise, as is this one, which is set in New York City, and the world is such that you get a phone call before like 3 a.m. or something the day that you're going to die, and then you die at some point during that day, which is crazy, but it absolutely, Adam Silvera completely pulls it off. So Mateo is the main character who gets the phone call. His dad is in a coma in the hospital. This is sad, y'all. And Teddy read this. She was like, I was sad the whole time. There's moments in here that are supposed to be light and happy. She was like, they did not lift me up enough. It, the title is true, but over the course of the day, Mateo and Rufus meet, and then they spend their last day all these different ways. And this is a worthwhile book. It's real sad, but it's great. And the characters were super real, and yeah, glad that's not a thing. The next book I read was This Is Body Grief by Jane Mattingly. I have followed Jane Mattingly on Substack for a long time, and we got to have her visit the shop, and she and I did a Q&A, talked about this book. The subtitle is Making Peace with the Loss That Comes with Living in a Body. And she has built this really, really creative and interesting framework for thinking about what it means to have a body, live in a body, and what do you do when your body disappoints you or breaks down or does not fit what you need or what you think you deserve. Like you think you deserve health, and when you're dealing with chronic illness, that's not what you get. And so she has the phases of body grief and talks you through how to identify them and how to work through them. And I thought that building a framework for that is something that's so important because everyone has to deal with body grief at some point. And so to be able to say, oh, I'm in, the one that was huge for me was apology. So like when you are inclined to apologize to the people around you and diminish like what you need in order to, not get sicker, and how to identify that, how to not like let that, mm, not to let yourself become like more unhealthy, and give into that, but actually kind of work through it and push through it and try and build trust with your body and give your body trust. So apology is a phase, dismissal is one, right? It's like when you know there's something wrong with you and you're like not willing to like look at it or think about it or whatever. Shock. I feel like I should just read that. The Myth of the Pain-Free World. I mean, come on, what a great. Here we go. Shock, apology, faults, fight, hopelessness, and hope. And then the goal is to move into body trust. So pick this up at your local bookshop. This book is called Don't Believe a Word. I'd had it on my TBR for years. I'm really interested in linguistics and language and how language becomes what it is. I'm really interested in phonetics, and I was not interested in this book at all. It organizes itself by breaking down common myths about language. And that was so uninteresting because it's so much less interesting to argue against something than to argue something or to say something worth saying. So I skimmed it. Don't recommend. Please tell me what other books fit that bill and I will read them. And then the last book is an annual favorite. You can see my collection right here under the peanut M&Ms. It is the best American food writing collection from each year. Megan has gotten it for me since 2019. They have changed the, you can see, design now 3 times in 6 years, which is a little bit obnoxious. But what is this book? I don't want to read restaurant reviews. You might think, why would I want this book? No, child, this is not restaurant reviews. It is anything written in any magazine or anywhere around the world last year about food. So it is some of the most interesting short form and mid form and long form pieces that you will get to read. These are selected by super interesting people. Simi Nosrat did one, Mark Bittman, Padma Lakshmi. I should have looked that up before I try to say it, but you know who she is because she was on Top Chef. She did this one, and they actually combined food and travel for the first time this year. Some of these pieces were incredible. That's how it is every year. There's just pieces that stick with you that you don't know you're going to think about again. A couple of months ago, when Daddy was in town, I was trying to tell the story about the first fancy restaurant in America, and it was run by a Black man who was named Thomas Downing or Robert Downing. And I was standing here and I was looking at all these books. I was like, where did I learn this story? I know I read it in print, and I knew there was something else to the story that I wanted to tell. It was, spoiler, in Best American Food Writing from last year. And the fun fact was not only that he ran the first fancy restaurant in America, and that women were actually allowed to go out to eat kind of for the first time because of places like this that were so nice inside, but it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. So then I got to read that and share that with them, and then share with my mom who was in New York. And so many times in the years since I've started reading these, I'll be places in the country or in the world, or I'll be eating something and I'll have read it and read about it in these books. So I was just in California, like I said. There's this incredible article called Kingdom of Dust in one of the previous ones that Simi Nosrat picked about how all of the water in California is used by like this one farmery, but like agriculture conglomerate. Anyway, focus on this one. There were some in here that were incredible. There was one about eggs and about how like eggs being orange is seen as meaning that it's super like well made or like local. I don't know how to talk about food very well. That's what this book is for. Egg, but if it's really orange, that just kind of means that they're giving the chickens like turmeric in their food. And it talks about other things around eggs and chickens and stuff. And I just love really specific writing that does something really interesting. There was an article in here about the Titanic submersible sinking. I think that fits under the travel writing. It was from the New Yorker. That was fantastic. It was just like tea. Like, oh my gosh. I could tell you all about that one. There's this ode to a grilled cheese sandwich. There's an ode to this salad dressing that this woman begins to eat. She's maybe in her 50s, and she starts to eat her salads with Catalina dressing because that's what her mom would cook for her. And then she goes into an exploration of like memory and what it means to cook for people and what it means to remember people through food. And there's just so many good ones in here, and everyone would like different ones from them. My favorite one was Numinous Strangers by Lisa Wells, which was a travel one, actually. That was remarkable. There was a couple other ones that I just loved, but there is this quote from C. Pam Zhang, who wrote Milk and Honey, which is a book that has a ton of food in it. It was, I think, her first novel, but she wrote an article for Esquire, and that's the one that's in here. And she said, this is the last line of her article and the last line of the book. Give me, please, bad food made by a person who loves me. And I feel that way. That whole book every year is just such a joy to read. So you have to read. Can I hold this now? Okay. These are the top 1, 2, 3, 4. Bone Black by Bell Hooks, Under the Skin by Linda Villarosa, The Barn by Wright Thompson, and The Best American Food Writing. The absolute run, don't walk would be The Barn and Bone Black. And that's the story. And now I'm gonna go to bed. And these are other really great books. Bye.